Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. Today we're going to continue on in Unit 6, Industrial and Economic Development. And over the last couple of videos we've been looking at some of these ideas that what can we do in order to improve the development of less developed countries. And so we're moving on from that topic, but still very much related, and we're looking at this idea of really kind of impacts on the environment, because as we've discussed really kind of throughout the course, obviously as the world marches forward and we look at population growth and we look at resource consumption and things like that, one of the greater concerns becomes what are we going to do in terms of the environment? What are we going to do in terms of environmental preservation, in terms of making sure that we have enough resources, food, water, fuel to go around the world? What are we going to do in terms of making sure that the environment remains a place that is, I guess, maybe the word we can use is clean, so that we're not polluting not only the natural environment but also the resources that we need in order to survive. And so, of course, with development, that's going to become an increasing concern and an increasing problem, because as we know, the more developed a place and people become, typically, the greater amount of resources that they begin to consume. Now, I will kind of make a note there that even though people in more developed countries consume more resources, they also consume them much more efficiently in terms of the way that they consume the resources. If you compare resource consumption in more developed countries versus less developed countries, the efficiency of those in less developed countries is much less so than those in more developed countries. Also, there's greater technology in more developed countries to figure out ways to be even more efficient in terms of resource consumption, and obviously there's greater wealth to make different decisions on how to live their lives in ways that are more environmentally friendly and more efficient in terms of resource consumption. So anyway, when we look at this idea of our concern for the environment and the growing world, and looking at what's going to happen in less developed countries as they become more developed, specifically if you look at India and China as they become wealthier and there are larger populations, more people moving into the middle class, that's where a lot of that resource consumption is going to come from. So there's this idea out there, and we're looking at what's called sustainable development. And you also might hear it called smart growth. So basically the idea here is, how can we encourage development across the world that's done in an environmentally conscious and environmentally sustainable way? Because the idea there is that we want people to be able to see the benefits of development. We want to see people experience the benefits of greater wealth and access to technology and those types of things, but we want to try and do so in an environmentally responsible and sustainable way, so that we don't, crush the earth under the weight of our resource consumption. So, of course, and that kind of moves me on to this next point here. The idea there is the concern of, too far. The concern there is, looking at human consumption versus the amount of the Earth's resources that are available. There's kind of this matrix over here that talks to you about the three core values of those who are part of sustainable development. And I think within this idea of sustainable development, you'll find people of all stripes. Those who maybe are a little bit more commercially driven and conservative in their thoughts and views, and then to the right, those who are way kind of to the far left, who want to put heavy burdens and taxes and things like that on people to restrict consumption of resources and limit size of housing and those types of things. And so I think you got to be kind of careful at who you're looking at. But there are all kinds of ideas out there that are being floated in terms of what are we going to do in the future, and what does the future of the world look like. And so I'll try to kind of keep it middle of the road here to kind of talk about maybe some more of the sensible approaches to these types of things. Anyway, that is the concern. Human consumption versus the available resources that are on the earth, and how do we march forward in time? Because, like I said, we don't want to deny people in less developed countries, because that would seem awfully self-centered if we tried to deny people in less developed countries access to better standard of living. And so, how do we do that in a way that's responsible, both kind of socially and environmentally? There are some policies out there, and I'm not necessarily a fan of all of them, that get at the heart of this and try to develop this idea of sustainable development. You have the development we're called urban growth boundaries. We'll talk more about this in Unit 7, our urban geography unit. There's the idea of cap and trade, and then there's the idea of trying to base this sustainable development on a green economy. So urban growth boundaries, you see this a lot in Portland. If you look in American maybe news, you see this happening in Portland, Oregon. San Francisco is another great example. Basically you just limit the amount of sprawl that can happen, and of course sprawl is synonymous with evilness in the suburbs and resource consumption and waste and those types of things. Problem with things like urban growth boundaries is just the incredible drive up in price of property, and limits space that people can own and things like that. There are great articles that are out there talking about California losing large numbers of residents because it's driving out middle class people. Anyway, that's an idea that's floated, cap and trade. Obviously dealing with carbon emissions, where companies buy carbon emissions, and depending on the number that they put out, if they have a certain number of carbon credits and they don't put out enough, they can sell off those credits to other companies. And the idea there is to try and make it a part of kind of almost like a Bitcoin situation, this kind of alter economy that's going on, and limiting the amount of carbon emissions that companies and factories can put out. The green economy is something where we're looking at people are talking about trying to base the economy on more green efforts. And we'll talk about an example of this in just a second. But developing green energy, developing green jobs, things that are more environmentally friendly and things like that. And of course, the problem there is the greater cost, and typically the less efficient elements are a part of the green economy. But people believe that if we're going to go into the future and still allow people to make money, because that's kind of this part right here, which is always one of my greatest concerns, is what are you going to do to the incomes and the relative wealth of people, especially in the middle and the lower classes. But they want to base it on this idea of a green economy, so creating jobs that are environmentally friendly and sound, and those types of things. So trying to bring all of these things together, idea of profit, planet, and people. So you can check out that matrix. But anyway, we're going to move on. So if we talk about the environment, obviously the organization that is kind of looked to as, the organization that tries to bring people together, I guess depending on how you look at them and what they're trying to do, to try and put together global initiatives and efforts, is the United Nations. And so they developed the UN Commission on Sustainable Development, and this just comes out of this quote comes out of their meeting that they had in 2002, and it says, "We commit ourselves to building a humane, equitable, caring, global society cognizant of the need for human dignity for all." So that's that idea of bringing together ideas of development, but also doing it in a sustainably a responsible way, in a way that's sustainable. And as we talked about in our political unit, the problem with coming together at the United Nations is you have all these different countries with all these different ideas. And as we're seeing in the world today, currently year 2015, not everybody exactly gets along. And so the concern for some countries is that the United Nations might put together policies that are not necessarily in the best interest of some countries. And so what do countries do when these policies come out and it's not going to work to the favor of their people, and in fact might make standard of living less for their people? And so that's the concern there with the United Nations, because sometimes it seems like it can be used as a political tool targeted at specific countries in the world. And so sometimes it's going to be very difficult for countries to get on board with some of their initiatives. So one of the things that people are looking at doing, and this just is one example of ways that that countries and local economies are looking at trying to develop environmentally sustainable economic activities. We have what's called ecotourism. I guess I did all this backwards, so I apologize for that. So again, there's this concern for the Earth's sustainability. There's greater impact due to increased access and travel around the world, especially for people in more developed countries. Obviously, with greater wealth and greater free time and leisure activities, so they travel to different parts of the world, want to see some natural environments, or to experience and explore those types of things. And so there's been developed this idea of what's called ecotourism. Now, where ecotourism plays into this idea of sustainable development is, as we talked about in our last unit, this idea of debt for nature swaps, less developed countries need something that's going to spur on their economy. And so they've got to look to different avenues or areas. And so we talked a little bit about how some of them are becoming, they're trying to attract people from more developed countries to come to their country for leisure and for travel. But and the concern there is that if they're building all these huge resorts, or if they are clearing out areas of natural habitation, then you're still damaging the environment. So you still have some of the same issues that you had with production of agricultural goods. So a lot of them are promoting, a lot of more developed countries are trying to promote this idea of ecotourism in less developed countries. And you even see it in more developed countries. We have several examples of ecotourism in the United States. You can just go Google ecotourism, and you'll see lots of ecotourist friendly places that you can go if that's something of concern of yours. But basically, the idea of ecotourism is you're trying to create tourism that revolves around and is based on the natural habitation. So people are there to enjoy the environment. They're there to experience the environment. They try to do it in an environmentally friendly and unimpactful kind of way. So you see here, you have this example. I don't exactly know where this is at, but going through the kind of the swampy jungle area, and so the idea there would be that you're there to experience that, walk through that in a way that is as least invasive and disruptive as possible. Now, I'm not exactly sure how invasive or disruptive this bridge is or this walkway is, but instead of building this giant resort, a lot of times you have smaller structures that typically probably work off of solar power. They may not have running water or plumbing, and no electronic devices, things along those lines that are going to make people more conscious and aware of the environmental impact that they are having. So anyway, that is an idea that people are touting and floating out there for less developed countries to still spur on their economy, create jobs, but do it in an environmentally friendly and sustainable way. Well, that's all that we have time for in this video, except for I think we have time for oh, never mind. I forgot. I had one more slide. My apologies. So when we look at ecotourism, ecotourism really provides two benefits, and yes, we will have a quiz ferret. It provides two benefits. Number one, I already mentioned this, it provides economic benefits, so the idea there is providing jobs, creating jobs, providing income for people, but also it creates a situation where there's active preservation of the environment. You're actively preserving and concerned about the environment because it's bringing you economic growth and economic development. So it's not like you're just letting the land sit there, maybe like a national park type situation, and it's revenue neutral, or you run a slight deficit on it. But the idea is with ecotourism, you want to try and generate income off of that, and so you are encouraged to preserve the environment because of the income that it's bringing. So yes, we do have time for a quiz ferret. Our furry friend has popped his head up out of the ground, and he has a question for us today, I do believe. Question is, in which countries is the idea of sustainable development a greater focus? Pause the video, see what you got. Answer is developing in less developed countries. I don't know if I explicitly talked about this or not earlier in the video, but the idea there is because that's where the greatest amount of growth is happening, and that's typically where larger populations are. That's the areas where you're going to have the greatest impact on the environment. And so as they're developing, we want to try and make sure that they're developing in a way that is environmentally friendly and sustainable. In more developed countries, the focus is on how can we kind of cut back on resource consumption, because we've already gotten to the point, so now we're trying to cut back and invest our wealth and technology in improving that particular part of our life. So I hope you found that to be helpful. If you have any questions, leave those in the comment box below, and I hope to see you next time.